I joined Dow Chemical right as Adept software was being selected. And until I left Dow in 2019 and joined Synergist, my team managed the global rollout of Adept. And the content that you're going to see today is a selection of material from several Dow past public presentations. So to tell the story, it's important to know a little bit about Dow, to understand the original problem that we were trying to solve, what processes we went through to select Adept, and some details about the project implementation or rollout. But more importantly, perhaps, is how we expanded the footprint of Adept from beyond the original mandate to a much wider value case. And then at the end, I'll summarize by talking about the value case. So you may recall that Dow and DuPont recently merged and split into 3 different companies. And my focus today is on what was called or is called the new Dow. And there's a couple key takeaways on this slide. One is Dow has many different sites in many different countries that need to share content and documentation. And the second piece is that Dow also has a very large internal engineering group. So Dow is in somewhat of a unique situation or unusual situation where the engineering group can create content that is then used by the operational side of the business. And that provides some interesting and useful and valuable synergies. So, and I'll speak about that in some of the use cases later. So manufacturing facilities often refer to the term as-built. And these are documents that represent how the plant was built versus, say, how it was originally designed. So in effect, as-built engineering documents represent a digital record of the facilities. And the problem we faced at Dow back in 2012 was there was a recognition that these as-built documents were managed in many different applications. Some of those were homegrown, some were unsupported, and some were outdated. There were even several VAX systems managing documents. And so there were pretty significant gaps in the usability of these systems, the security, reliability, and performance, resulting in things such as documents could be lost. People might use the wrong version. There could be people who see things who weren't supposed to see. And given the global nature of Dow, there was a significant friction for sharing information across sites. So this mandate that we were given was deploy this centrally supported document management system. But from a user's perspective, it was about providing a single global portal for engineering documents. So regardless of where you went inside Dow, you said, aha, I know how this system works. I can get the information that I need. So you may know Dow has a pretty significant Six Sigma methodical, thorough culture. And so we took a very systematic approach to defining requirements and selecting a vendor. And a key piece of that was we looked at all our existing systems and we extracted out requirements. And then we added to that what else we wanted to see. And we ended up with a list of 85 specific functionality needs. And we went out into the marketplace and then kind of got the environment down to, in the end, where we did a proof of concept for the top 2 vendors. And in the end, Adept won that competition. And this is an actual screenshot from a presentation I made to recommend the implementation of Adept. And you can see by the data here, in the end, we felt like Adept was the lowest risk, most highly reliable, and a very intuitive solution for document management. I think it's important to understand a bit about the challenge that we had in Dow and how we addressed that. And as I said earlier, Dow had a lot of a lot of global sites that were quite diverse. And that's partly because Dow is a company of acquisition. And in addition to the Dow sites, there were a number of sites that came from Union Carbide, Roman Haas, Dow Corning, and DuPont, and even some other smaller companies. And each one of those companies had a different way that their data was sliced and diced and stored, and that's what we call metadata. It's the information about the document, the process plant, the location, the tag name, etc. That data is stored in different ways by different companies. And you remember that we had this concept of having a common portal and global usability. And so the question was, could we end up with a universal set of metadata that worked across all those sites? But each site does things in a different way. So could we have common workflows? Each site names their documents in completely different ways. So how could we handle the fact that out of 5 million documents, what if you had some with the same file name? And so the solution that we took, or the direction we took there, was before we started this first site, we spent a significant amount of time developing a deployment template, which used a standard attribute set. But at the same time, we approached each site in a unique way. We wanted consistency, but we didn't want to break what they had. And this was a critical point to getting acceptance at the sites. And so every site does things in different ways. And so our going in tenet was, to use Covey's phrase, seek first to understand what they did and why they did it, and see if what we had to offer could be an equivalent. And what we found in almost every case, we were able to meet the requirements, the specific requirements of local sites without doing any custom software. That's pretty significant from a long-term support perspective. So take a look at typical projects. You can see the data here that projects ranged from very small that we could do in a week up to quite significant that you could do in over a year and a half or potentially longer. We focused on the engineering documents at this phase, not larger business documents. That was not where we felt like the most value was at the beginning, but that changed over time. So Adept today is managing a significant amount of the digital documents, or the digital twin, to use the term that's popular nowadays. And to make that a little more real, there's data from over 40 sites, and there's about 5,000 named users, and I think maybe they've exceeded 4 million documents at this time. Now, but what we found was, remember, this was our original mandate. What we found was that the success we had and the way we went about our solution of more of a pull rather than a push, we had a lot of word of mouth that fed back to us. And we had people come to us and say, hey, we have this kind of document. Can you put that in Adept? Is there a space for that? And over time, we went in that direction, such that now, way beyond that original mandate, Adept now stores most deliverables from significant capital projects within Dow. Adept manages the most effective technology content. And there's even project performance metrics that are calculated within Adept. So Adept's usage expanded significantly beyond what we first thought, and it was really more of a pull by the success of our projects. So let's look at a couple statistics. This is a graph showing, since actually the beginning of the implementation, the number of documents inside our Adept system. And you can see there's a pretty significant growth marked by some very large migrations on different sites. And like I said, this was back in 2019, I think, and it was around 3.5 million documents. But the point was that there's a continual growth of usage. Now, looking at this from another perspective, this is a graph of various activities, what we call like value generating activities, check-ins, check-outs, views, etc. And I'll focus on the views. And When I left Dow, it had reached about 60,000 document views a month, or about 3,000 per workday. And that's a pretty significant number, and you feel like you're really impacting the way people do their business. So if we translate that into a value case, and I have a few slides on that here. Remember, our original goal was to provide this global access portal to as-built documents. And if you kind of take a conservative approach and you say, I have 4 million documents, and we know from our usage data that there's about 2% viewed monthly. And if you assume about 2 minutes saved per view and a pretty significant dollar per hour opportunity cost, just the time savings can exceed $10 million a year. But there's more than that. The depth can make a pretty big difference in how you manage your IP. And you probably have heard of the case where DuPont lost a lot of value because documents were removed from their system. The document management system cannot prevent that, but it can alert and let you know that something abnormal is happening. For example, if someone copies out 9,000 documents, that's pretty unusual, and you can alert on that and notify that, hey, someone ought to go take a look at this. From a global collaboration perspective, we had cases where it took people 5 minutes in India to open a document from the United States. And they would actually, it was common discussion to start to open and then go get a cup of coffee. But with Adept's replication capability, we were able to cut those times in many cases from like 5 minutes to 15 seconds. That changes the way people work and can share information around the world. Those of you who work in the chemical industry will certainly be aware of the needs to track registered equipment with OSHA 1910 and then manage documents from an export technology compliance. And a document management system like Adept can make a big difference in how you're able to manage that and make sure that you're able to provide information for auditing and compliance. Excuse me just a second. Now, when projects are done, historically, there's a significant handover that used to be done by shipping boxes of manuals, physical boxes of manuals, or handing off a bunch of CDs. And that's sort of been the traditional way this is done for many years. And what we found was with Adept, if you manage your capital project documents inside Adept, there can be an all digital transfer from a system that manages this to the plant library or as-built system. And we were able to do that and provide a much more searchable set of metadata that will impact the facility for many years to come. And so we were able to reduce the handover time from months down to weeks. And now we've given people in the plant a much better way to find things that's going to impact that site's performance over the life of the facility. And so to summarize this, if you look at all of the impact of finding documents more quickly, finding the right version, reducing errors of implementation, understanding exact version, who you sent to and when did you send it, there's a consensus that you can have an impact overall on, let's say, even an 18-month or 2 or 3 year project. And even if you can accelerate that project by 1 or 2 days, what is that worth? I think that's a conservative perspective. And if you look at some large capital facilities that we had worked on, and this is public data, just 1 or 2 days more production, these things are worth millions of dollars. And that's way beyond what was the original justification for engineering document management. And so really, this customer-focused results can drive a huge growth in what you're trying to implement. And there's spin-offs from each project. And in the end, there was much greater benefits than initially projected.